Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel Let's Talk Boxing. The breaking news from this afternoon is that the Chris EUBANK Jr versus CONOR BENN fight has been postponed due to the adverse findings in CONOR BENN's drugs test. Matchroom had reportedly considered going to the High Court, but they wouldn't have gotten a decision in time, and so as a result their fight will not be occurring this weekend. But Matchroom are not happy apparently, because they felt that the British board did not go through the relevant due process, and as a result they will be pursuing this matter possibly legally. So who knows what the ramifications will be regarding this moving forward. In terms of the decision itself, from a boxing perspective, in terms of sporting integrity, it's the right decision, because had CONOR BENN won this fight, he wouldn't get the credit anyway. And if EUBANK lost this fight, it wouldn't have been fair, because it wouldn't have been on a level playing field. Even if you are a believer that CONOR BENN did not knowingly ingest an illegal substance, let's say that's your position, and I've done a video on what this drug is and how it works, so please check that out. But let's say for argument's sake, he did not know. He would still benefit from the performance enhancing abilities of this substance, so it wouldn't have been a fair playing field. From the perspective of fighter safety, you are boosting the physical arsenal of CONOR BENN, and as a result of that you are making him a greater threat to the physical safety of Chris EUBANK Jr. in what is already a dangerous sport. Now, this is not to say that CONOR BENN would have been transformed into Ivan Drago. However, it does increase the chances of something happening, and in the unlikely event that something serious would have happened to Chris EUBANK Jr., who would then be held accountable? You'd have to say that somebody would have to go to prison. And Eddie Hearn himself has been caught in the past saying that it's essentially murder if somebody gets killed in that sort of situation. So would Eddie Hearn himself have been put on trial for something like that? God forbid if that was to happen. And Eddie Hearn has been caught on camera saying an awful lot of things about drugs cheaters. He's been having almost like a zero tolerance approach to it. So from the perspective of the integrity of the promoter and the network, the fight shouldn't go ahead either. So all of those things, I totally understand it is the right decision. This is not to say, however, that we're not also seeing some double standards and some ridiculous narratives that are being thrown around from people with agendas. I find it absolutely baffling how so many people, often fans, people who are not actually affiliated with a rival promotional team in any sort of professional capacity, how those sorts of people are absolutely delighted that this has all happened and the fight's off. I'm not talking about the decision itself. I understand why you would agree with the decision to call the fight off, just like I agree with it. I'm talking about the fact that it's been cancelled because it hurts Eddie Hearn. Certain people are absolutely delighted. And I'm not saying the Hearn supporters are any better if this was the other way around. You've got fans that are Matchroom FC, Queensbury FC, PBC FC, so to speak. They root for these promoters like they root for football teams. And it's almost as though they're not real fans. And as a result, you've seen the development of so many ludicrous narratives, and you've also seen public figures, Chris Lloyd, Adi Oladipo, being unfairly targeted for something they've not done wrong. When I first heard of CONOR BENN popping positive, my initial response was, oh, what an idiot. We're probably going to end up missing out on this fight now. In other words, I understood that that particular act could cause the fight to justly be called off, which means that I, as a boxing fan, miss out on a terrific event. You see the difference? I want you to consider this little analogy. You've got one of these fans who are pretending that they're just happy for the integrity of the sport and fighter safety. That's what they tell us their motivation is about. A dodgy promoter nearly put a guy in danger by putting him in the ring. We'll talk about that. One of these fans is walking through a field, and as he's walking through the field, he sees this shiny little object on the floor. He tentatively walks over, he picks it up. Have I found a piece of treasure? As he pulls it out the mud, he realizes this is a lamp. So he grabs his shirt, he starts wiping off this dusty gold lamp, and all of a sudden that big blue genie from Aladdin pops out. And instead of giving you 3 wishes, he says to you, you got one of 2 choices. Today's August the 1st. Neither fighter has had any sort of issues moving up to this fight. We either get this fight in its scheduled date, all the preparation will go swimmingly well, it'll be a massive event, and you get to watch it and enjoy it as a boxing fan. Or alternatively, tomorrow, one of these 2 fighters is going to fail a drugs test. Which of these 2 scenarios do you want to happen? There's going to be a very large proportion of fans who are going to say, stick it to Eddie Hearn, and get very excited that they've been given this option. That is what I do not understand. I find absolutely baffling. Don't you want to see these fights occur? Rob on Twitter at Maraxes9 actually tweeted me a little conversation between a couple of people. One of them says, it's genuinely been the worst year for Hearn, ain't it? Feels great saying it. And he's put a laughing emoji. And somebody else responded to that guy to say, strange thing to be happy about. The rest of us just wish Ben wasn't a cheat so we could watch the fight. And that's exactly my sort of response. No one's saying the fight should go on. And when I've tried to explain this to people on Twitter, some people clearly have issues of comprehension. They can't understand this basic factor. I'm not saying the fight should have gone on, but I'm gutted that it's not going ahead because of what happened with Conor Benn. Secondly, they claim, a lot of these people, that their primary concern is fighter safety. Really? I did a poll on Twitter whereby I asked, who do you think is in greater danger physically speaking? Chris EUBANK Jr, a world-class middleweight, going in against a big punching, outsized welterweight who's juiced up, say, for argument's sake, or Lucas Browne, a washed up 43-year-old heavyweight who was recently stopped by a 41-year-old retired rugby player in the very first round, and prior to that had been stopped by the likes of Dave Allen, going in against a monster punching youthful world-class heavyweight in Daniel Dubois, because another promoter tried to get that over the line. And today the British Board of Boxing Control blocked that fight. They would not license it. But the fact that they blocked it means that somebody tried to make it. Were you equally as angry with another promoter for putting a man like Lucas Browne in serious danger against Daniel Dubois? After all, your motive is fighter safety, right? That's what you're telling us. That's your primary motive. Well, I carried out a poll on Twitter to ask about this. Who's in more danger? And so far, 76% say Lucas Browne. Now, I don't know what those other 24% are thinking, but the fact of the matter is the majority of people seem to realise Lucas Browne is more likely to lose the fight than EUBANK would be. He's more likely to get knocked out than EUBANK would be. And if he is going to get knocked out, it's more likely to be a much more devastating, God forbid, serious knockout than EUBANK if he was to fight Conor Benn even juiced up. So, again, to reiterate, the increased chances of improving a fighter's arsenal unnaturally basically increases the chances of a mishap happening, a catastrophe happening, physically speaking. And we want to be minimizing those percentages, not maximizing them. So no one's saying this fight should go ahead. But don't pretend that your sole motive is fighter safety. Now, as Steve Kim, the American journalist, said, what is the point of drugs testing if when fighters test positive, you don't cancel the fight? And I totally understand that and agree with that. But we're also seeing anyone that doesn't, any analyst, any presenter that doesn't jump up and down and say this should instantly be cancelled, they are themselves being targeted. I've seen personally on people's lives, on people's channels, in the comments on Twitter, people targeting the likes of Adi Oladipo, targeting the likes of Chris Lloyd. What are you talking about? Chris Lloyd interviewed Chris EUBANK Jr. yesterday, and he said to him, since you don't condone what has happened here, why are you still willing to go ahead with the fight? And Chris EUBANK explained himself. What else do you want Chris Lloyd to do? He's challenged Chris EUBANK Jr. What else do you want him to do? Throw his microphone on the floor and say, I'm not having this. If you go ahead with this fight, Chris, this is a disgrace and I don't want anything to do with you or the zone. What are you talking about? Like, grow up. These people have lives, they have livings. This is not a journalist that works for a major news organization and they're selling you propaganda for a war. These are guys that are essentially presenters. And they are presenting the developing news and they are asking the questions to the fighters and the fighters are answering. What is it you expect them to do? I don't understand. It's a very difficult job. What do you expect? But anyway, I want to know people's views on this, on the hypocrisy that we're seeing and the double standards that we're seeing when it comes to fighter safety, when it comes to the narrative regarding some promoters but not others. And again, this is not a defense of Eddie Hearn. He has been hypocritical, there's no doubt about it. There is a double standard in the way he has acted. Again, you want to point that out, no problem whatsoever. But come on, man. Targeting the likes of Lloyd and Oladipo and making out as though you're some virtuous dude who's standing on a pedestal and preaching to the rest of the lowly masses who are willing to entertain this fight. What are you talking about? And to reiterate, well done to the British Board of Boxing Control for seemingly putting fighter safety before profits. Well done. There's no argument here where I'm backing the idea that the fight must have gone ahead. I'm not saying that. But there is certainly an issue when it comes to the way the narrative is being portrayed. But I will ask this one last question. Although I don't think the board have done anything wrong from a moral perspective and in terms of sporting integrity, according to Wasserman and Matchroom, they did not go through the typical procedure, the due process that needs to be gone through in order to cancel a fight. That does leave them open potentially to legal action. Why do you think this has happened when they are under extreme pressure financially from the likes of Matchroom and Wasserman? The British board is not a rich board, not really. Like, they could really get seriously damaged with a lawsuit here. Why would they take this particular stance? Is it because of integrity and taking fighter safety into account? Or is there influence from other promoters, undue influence? What do you think? Let me know what you think about that. Now, as you can see, the light has changed somewhat. It's now a lot later in the day, but I'm going to add something to this video before finally uploading it. A few people have asked me, Chris, what do you think about legalizing all performance enhancing drugs? And that way you are guaranteed a level playing field. No, I don't agree with this. Number one, you are synthetically boosting the athletic attributes of a particular individual, and sport should be about the individual person's capability rather than which pharmaceutical organization is able to produce the best possible substance to increase an athlete's abilities. So for instance, if I have a particular drug that increases your stamina by 15% and a competitor comes along and says, oh, we've created a better pill and this one increases your stamina by 25%, well then what am I celebrating exactly? The athlete or the actual drug? Basically, you don't want to become like a Formula One situation whereby it's the car that matters more than the driver in some regards. Yeah, you've still got top class drivers, but a lot of the times the cars aren't equal. You don't want that in boxing or football or athletics or anything like that. You want to know which human being can overcome. It's about natural physical attributes, the mental element, the emotional aspect, and I don't want to see that tainted by allowing all drugs to become legal. Having said that, WADA gave an interview, a spokesman from them gave an interview during the Olympic Games, and they explained how they only catch 2% of drugs cheats, and they were basically explaining how the reason for this is that they're always one step behind, because a lot of the drugs that are being taken are synthetic. They're invented in a lab. They're chemists that are behind them, and so what happens is you can only test for substances that you know exist. And so as a result of that, they're always playing catch up until they know something exists, until they find something. It's very difficult to say, right, we're going to test for this across the board. And a lot of different testing agencies have different standards and test for different things. So they're always playing catch up. So that is a potential problem. What they've tried to do, they were saying, to bypass that is to look at certain physical biological parameters to see how those change. So for instance, if I can see that X person's testosterone has increased drastically, well then why has it increased drastically? Even if I can't find the substance, something's happened in this short space of time, in this particular week, that has led to this shooting up, and that can't possibly be natural. So they look for areas like that, but that's when you get these masking agents that come into play. So they're always going to be chasing, and this is the problem. So it's not a perfect existing situation. The fact of the matter is, I'm 100% sure that Chris EUBANK Jr. and pretty much any other fighter you can think of would have faced a drugs cheat at some point in their lives. It's very common, according to most people, and according to, you've got professional fighters that feel this way, trainers, the drugs testing companies themselves. So don't for 1 minute think that, you know, Chris EUBANK Jr. would have been in against someone who's bringing a sort of level of athleticism and power and speed that he's never experienced before. There's a reason Chris wanted to get in the ring regardless, okay? It's not about that. It is just about creating an unfair playing field. And what if something terrible had then happened? What do you then put that down to? You see what I'm saying? Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Please don't forget to hit a stiff jab on that like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Let me know what your opinions are on all of these things we've discussed. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.